Heavy leaden clouds blanketed the entire sky. Autumn had stopped playing with summer and fully asserted its rights. A hard rain was falling with no sign of stopping soon. Despite it was only noon, it felt like evening. Doris used to adore this weather. In the orphanage where she lived from the age of 10, she loved sitting at the windowsill in the farthest corner of the corridor. This was her private sanctuary. During unpleasant weather, she liked to nestle there hidden from prying eyes, with a book of fantasy stories, diving into the enchanting world of magic. Outside there could be a bitter rain or a winter blizzard, but inside it was always warm and snug. During these moments, Doris felt an incredible sense of calm and protection, reminiscent of her early childhood, when she had a family. She remembered her mother as young and beautiful, always smiling. Doris pictured her in a light, white dress, with small polka dots, blonde curls cascading over her shoulders, and lips accentuated with lipstick. Her mother worked at the pastry shop, often bringing young Doris cream-filled pastries or croissants. At work, she was valued and loved for her easygoing personality. Doris's father was a skilled mechanic at a factory. Tall, broad-shouldered and vivacious, he loved lively gatherings. They spent their spare time like any other family, going to movies or parks. He would carry his daughter on his shoulders, her tiny arms wrapped around him in a mix of fear and joy, knowing he wouldn't let her fall. Her parents were a sociable couple, often hosting friends late into the night. These gatherings ended with a chorus of loud songs, much to the neighbours' chagrin. Doris couldn't pinpoint when their lives began to change. Over time, some guests couldn't stand after the raucous parties. Mornings often revealed snoring bodies reeking of alcohol, a kitchen table littered with forgotten snacks, and a floor lined with empty bottles. Her mother seemed to care less about her appearance, applying thick powder to mask her puffy eyes. She'd wear clean, albeit unironed clothes, and trudge to work. Her father, even worse, was often unable to think or move in the morning. His frequent absences finally led to his dismissal, despite his talent and merits. Her mother was shouldering the entire family's burden, her once sparkling eyes devoid of their former light. All day, Doris's father did nothing but scold everyone, blaming them for his misfortune and drowning his sorrows in drink. It pained the girl to witness her parents' steady decline, but she was powerless to change the situation. Money was scarce, and soon Doris's classmates began to mock her worn-out clothes and derisively call her alcoholic's daughter. But unfortunately, the mother, weakened by alcohol too, couldn't endure such a life for long. One day, after a particularly hard day, she got drunk and never woke up. The doctors attributed her death to alcohol poisoning. Doris vividly remembers mourning her mother near her coffin. Now, her family essentially gone because her father had become a stranger to her. After the funeral, he spiraled further into his addiction, rarely sobering up. It was unclear where he got the money for alcohol and tobacco, but Doris never saw her father sober again. She would leave for school in the morning while he was still passed out on the sofa and return in the afternoon to find him already in the kitchen, setting up for another evening of drinking. He paid little attention to his daughter. Alcohol had transformed him into a zombie-like figure with a blue face, wandering eyes and shaking hands. However, this didn't last long. One day the girl returned from school to a shocking scene. A fire truck and an ambulance were parked near their entrance. The air was thick with the smell of burning, and around 30 bystanders were chattering loudly, pointing at what used to be their window. All that was left was a black charred hole, like a portal to hell. Her drunken father had fallen asleep with a lit cigarette, burning down the apartment and suffocating in the process. This is how Doris ended up in the orphanage. The constant noise and commotion of the orphanage wearied the quiet girl, who was still reeling from 2 funerals. A secluded spot by the window shielded her from the bothersome attention of the staff and other children. That's when she began to love this kind of weather. This gave her hope for the future. The weather would eventually calm and the sun would shine again. But now she was on the other side of the window, and the weather evoked entirely different emotions. The cold wind was furious, attempting to rip off her simple polyethylene raincoat that lay over a light plain coat. It was chilling her to the bone. Her faux leather boots were soaked, making an unpleasant slapping noise with each step. Doris trudged through the pouring rain down the grey city street, following wherever her gaze led. The few passers-by, huddled under umbrellas, paid her no mind as they rushed to get out of the damp. Cars were indifferent to pedestrians, splashing them as they sped through puddles. Doris's palms and knees were completely numb and lacking sensitivity. She needed to find somewhere warm, even if it was just an entranceway. Doris circled several buildings, but each one was barred by the cold indifference of a code lock. A brightly coloured supermarket facade appeared in the distance. It was a place to warm up and dry off. A wave of warm air greeted Doris as she stepped inside. The young woman meandered through the aisles lined with goods in brightly coloured packages, designed to entice shoppers. She didn't take a basket. What was the point? The only things in her pocket were a jingling handful of coins and 2 small paper bills. She'd have to live on them for a while, until she could figure something out. Suddenly the baby moved within her. Doris stroked her belly, trying to soothe him. "It's okay, baby." But her mind raced. How could it possibly be okay? With just 3 months left until the birth, she found herself jobless, penniless, and without a profession. Every potential employer took one look at her belly and turned her away. Even the lowest-paying jobs were out of her reach. And, understandably, no one wanted to hire an employee who would soon go on maternity leave. The situation was a stalemate. She used to laugh at the over-dramatized TV shows where the main character faced insurmountable problems all at once. She marveled at the wild imaginations of the screenwriters who came up with such intricate plot lines. She never thought such things happened in real life. And of course, she never imagined that she could find herself in such a situation. When did it all start? Probably with Claire. Claire was a carefree girl of Doris's age who ended up in the same orphanage during high school. Her mother was deprived of parental rights, but the girl did not grieve her too much. She was more bothered by the sudden loss of freedom she had enjoyed living with her mother. The nimble Claire ran away a few times. However, after each runaway, she always returned. She was entirely different from Doris, but she chose her as a friend for some reason. Claire often boasted about her past life, filled with parties, admirers, and their gifts. She was particularly fascinated by the material aspects of life. Before bedtime, Claire would share her dreams with Doris about becoming a model and earning a significant amount of money. She admired the model's glamorous and seemingly effortless lifestyle. Her ambition stemmed from her confidence in her looks, which she believed made her suitable for the modelling industry. Doris concurred with her new friend's perspective. Restless, Claire couldn't wait to leave the walls of the state institution. Doris was hesitant about taking such a drastic step, her fears holding her back. But Claire was unyielding, persisting with her arguments. What's in store for us here? A mediocre school, followed by a monotonous job as a seamstress or a cook. But you could be a model, seen by the whole world. Let's go. Your life is out there. The allure of a bright, promising future stirred their young spirits. Eventually, Doris yielded to Claire's persuasion, and they left their predictable world for one filled with dreams and uncertainties. Thus, one day, these 2 naive young dreamers walked into a modelling agency. Doris was nervous, expecting ridicule and rejection. However, they were met with interest instead. Claire, with her striking and provocative appearance, knew how to showcase her best traits. She confidently strutted down the catwalk with an almost professional gait. When asked to wear a dress from the latest collection, she promptly, without any hint of shyness, changed into the fashionable outfit, enhancing her appearance even further. Those around her nodded in approval, some even applauded. Doris, however, couldn't act in the same way, as it went against her nature. She began to regret agreeing to this adventure. People from the modelling agency scrutinized her like an item at a fair, openly discussing her flaws. She's attractive, even more so than the previous girl, but why so stiff? She's like a block of wood. Claire didn't appreciate the comparison. believing herself to be incomparable to her friend. Deep down, the seed of envy began to take root. Meanwhile, Doris started pacing back and forth, vehemently denying that she slouched or hunched, yet her shoulders slumped as if defending herself from numerous glares. Eventually, she was given a break. A tall, well-groomed woman, apparently in charge, told Doris that she had to work hard if she wished to stay. "I see potential in you, but whether there is talent, time will show." Doris agreed, having no other option. She couldn't bear the thought of returning to the orphanage in shame. On one hand, she was fascinated by the backstage glamour, the beautiful clothes, and the attractive people. On the other hand, she disliked the idea of being a silent mannequin for others' clothes. Claire quickly befriended several models, paying little attention to Doris. 2 days later, Doris was walking through the podium more confident. However, she was yet to acquire the inner courage highly valued in the modelling business. Meanwhile, Claire was consistently flattering Katrina, who was in charge of the girls at the agency. She seemed to be trying to convince Katrina of Doris's lack of talent. At the end of the day, Katrina announced that Doris was unlikely to succeed as a model, but she could stay on as an assistant. Doris was relegated to cleaning, fetching costumes and running errands. She didn't complain, and even felt relief when the attention was no longer focused on her. The only person who couldn't stop watching her was the chief administrator, Hunter. Hunter took immediate notice of the quiet girl with an uncommon appearance. There were plenty of beautiful models around, each unique in their own way, but Doris had something special, a trusting and straightforward demeanour that was rare among the models. Hunter didn't miss an opportunity to wink at her, compliment her, express his sympathy, and advocate for her whenever he could. Thanks to his protection, Doris was given the room in the dormitory. While she felt embarrassed by his attention, she was also profoundly grateful. Having her own private space allowed her to enjoy solitude and silence after long, hectic days filled with the incessant noise and running around. As she lay in bed each night, her thoughts often turned to Hunter. She recalled his casual touches in the elevator, the way he kissed her hand goodbye. These gestures stirred a pleasant sensation within her, evoking a sense of longing. On her weekly day off, she found herself missing his warm smile and his playful gaze. One day, Hunter called unexpectedly, inviting Doris for a city stroll. The prospect of their meeting made her heart flutter with excitement. Her young soul craved the emotional thrill of new experiences. Seeing Hunter in a casual setting, she realized she had long been in love with him. The warmth of his strong hands and the allure of his sweet words stirred a tender excitement in her heart. Love swept her into its exhilarating dance, leaving her no respite, and Doris didn't resist. She wholeheartedly embraced this relationship. She thought as though the entire world was created just for them, and nothing could stand in their way. The news that Hunter was married only briefly confused the naive Doris, because Hunter quickly soothed her concerns, claiming that his marriage was only on paper and that he planned to file for divorce soon, to be exclusively and eternally with her. Everyone at work knew about their relationship, but tactfully remained silent. Only Claire looked at her ex-girlfriend with a sarcastic grin. She herself was already in full swing romance with a businessman. One time, Hunter became distant, citing heavy workloads and fatigue. Their meetings became less frequent and shorter. He started avoiding talks about the future, a stark contrast to his earlier promises of a prosperous life. And soon Doris realized that she was pregnant. The young woman welcomed her pregnancy, believing that Hunter would soon divorce his wife for her, as he had often claimed. Hunter, however, was taken aback by the pregnancy news. He started interacting with Doris only professionally, responding with irritation and rudeness to her attempts at private conversation. In addition, Doris noticed that he was now looking at another model, the way he had looked at her before. Doris refused to believe that Hunter had left her. She rationalized his behavior, attributing it to his workload and believing that he would become a kind and loving man again. She remained patient and hopeful as her belly grew, and then she saw Hunter leaving in his luxury car with a new girl, and the reality of her situation finally sank in. In the morning, she resolutely came to Hunter in the office to clarify their relationship, but he only rudely and coldly kicked her out the door. The following day she was laid off, accused of stealing a jewellery set. Doris wept, her tears smearing her cheeks, as she tried to assert her innocence. But the decision had been made. She had no doubt that Hunter, who sought to remove his former lover from sight, was behind this. Claire watched this chaos silently, relieved that her friend, a reminder of her past at the orphanage, would no longer be around. Katrina suggested that Doris leave amicably, avoiding involvement with the police. Of course, this meant she had to leave the dormitory. That's how, in that chilly autumn rain, she found herself in a store, seeking shelter to avoid the cold and potential sickness. The security guard began to watch her suspiciously. She had no shopping basket, but was visibly pregnant. For about 20 minutes, Doris wandered between the rows without selecting any items. Must be a thief. She's probably hiding stolen goods under her clothes, the guard thought, following her closely. Eventually, he approached her and asked gruffly, "Girl, do you need help choosing something?" Doris recoiled in fear, which only increased his suspicion. God, now I'll be thrown out of the store in disgrace, she thought. She went to the bread and cakes department and chose the most affordable bun. Although it cost her a few coins, she needed to eat. Even though she found it difficult to eat, she still forced herself to chew and swallow the vanilla-scented bun. It wasn't the child's fault for having a neglectful mother. The indifferent guard maintained a watchful eye on the drenched woman, quietly eating a bun by the cash register. There was nothing to do anymore. Doris had to go further, but where to? The disparity between the indoor warmth and the outdoor chill seemed starker. The biting wind seemed to be waiting for Doris at the exit, hitting her with a gust of frigid air and showering her with droplets. She entered a few small stores along the way, but the distrustful looks deterred her, and besides, she couldn't afford to purchase anything more. Little by little, the apartment buildings were left behind. Before Doris, a quiet realm of private homes stretched out as far as the eye could see. She'd never been to this part of the city. Enormous mansions were interspersed with smaller houses. There were no pedestrians on the rain-soaked street. The young woman halted, uncertain of her next move. Should she turn back and wander the cold, uncaring streets? Or should she go on, in hopes of finding an uninhabited, abandoned house where she could shelter from the weather and collect her thoughts? Doris stopped suddenly as her gaze fell on the high wicket gate in front of a substantial house. It was slightly ajar, almost inviting her in. Without thinking, she went inside the yard and knocked on the front door. Unsure of what she would say next, Doris felt this was her only chance. "Who is it?" a pleasant male voice inquired. "Hello, my name is Doris. I noticed your gate is open. May I come in to speak with you?" she replied, realizing her words might sound odd, potentially alarming to a stranger. Surprisingly, the front door opened, revealing a tall, dark-haired man standing on the threshold. Doris's eyes were immediately drawn to the white bandage covering his eyes and making it difficult to determine his age. "I'm sorry, I'm not here to steal anything, don't worry. I just need a place to avoid the rain. May I come in to warm up and dry off?" It was impossible to discern the man's thoughts from his partially hidden face. Anticipating a potential rejection, Doris stood partially turned towards the exit. However, the man unexpectedly said, "Come in. There's a kitchen on the right. Let's have some tea." Navigating by touch, he moved deeper into the room, inviting the unexpected guest to follow. Realizing the man was completely blind, Doris kindly prepared a hot beverage. "My name is Sven. So what happened to you, Doris?" he asked casually, as if an old friend had visited. The blind host's unexpected hospitality touched the young woman. She was finally able to remove her damp outerwear and waterlogged shoes. The hot cup warmed her hands and her spirit. The stranger sitting across from her did not glare at her or insist on anything. The words came out of Doris's mouth by themselves. She shared her whole story openly. Her childhood in the orphanage, her work, her relationship with Hunter, and her pregnancy. "So you're expecting a child?" he suddenly asked with kindness in his voice. "You must be so happy." "Yes, happy," she sighed thoughtfully. He then revealed his longing for children. "And I always wanted children. My ex-wife got pregnant shortly after the wedding. I was so dreaming, so looking forward to this child, but at an early term there was a miscarriage. After that, there were no more successful pregnancies." His voice was tinged with sadness as he spoke. After a brief silence, he started to share his own story. He had owned a small plant for several years. 2 months prior, there had been an explosion in the lab while he was present there. A wave of hot chemical vapours had severely burned his face, particularly his eyes. The doctors were still uncertain if he would regain his sight. Soon after the accident, his wife, Bree, had promptly filed for divorce and property division. While Sven was hospitalized and struggling with depression, his ex-wife managed to seize most of their assets, including those to which she had no rights. Sven could not understand how Bree, once a cheerful and kind woman, had turned into a self-centered woman focused solely on money in just a few years after their wedding. Engrossed in his business, he failed to notice that his young wife had made new idle friends. Their life revolved around maintaining a lifestyle focused on gyms, beauty salons, trendy diets, supplements, and expensive self-development training. Eventually, she lost interest in her husband and their home. Unsatisfied with all this situation, Sven decided to reduce Bree's expenses to ground her in reality, but this only infuriated her. Their relationship soured further, and Sven's sudden disability clarified their who was who. Alone in a large empty house, Sven withdrew into himself. He dismissed all the servants, save for a maid who cleaned and did laundry on Thursdays. He always ordered food delivered to his house, and all day long he listened to music and audiobooks. His time passed monotonously and tediously, and he saw no hope or light in his future, both literally and figuratively. Doris felt sympathy for the unfortunate man. His kindness and sincerity towards a strange woman from the street, whom he couldn't even see, deeply moved her. Sven remained silent for a moment, seemingly wrestling with a difficult decision. "Doris, I have a proposal for you," he said hesitantly. "Would you consider living here and posing as my wife for a while?" Doris was taken aback. Did all men have the same intentions? "What do you mean?" she asked, her tone defiant and ready to leave the house of this seemingly perverse man. Preferring the streets seemed a better option. "You've misunderstood me," Sven briefly explained. "I mean, would you act as my assistant in public and be my eyes? I have an important deal coming up, and I've begun to doubt my employees. I suspect my ex-wife has bribed them to take over my business. She isn't content with less, she wants everything. I need someone I can trust." Doris sighed with relief, her initial fears alleviated. "Why did I immediately assume the worst?" she thought. "Sven already has enough to deal with, and here I am with my foolish assumptions." "Thank you for the offer. I won't let you down," she assured him. Grateful for the temporary shelter, she began to care for the lonely blind man, preparing his meals, reading books to him aloud, and running errands. With her assistance, he was able to venture outside. Her gentle voice accompanied him everywhere, and her steady hand offered support. As Sven held her warm, graceful palm, he felt a reciprocal response that comforted him and signified her reassuring presence. Being alongside this man lifted Doris's spirits. His serene expression, insightful words, and firm hand provided her inner balance. His close presence enveloped her in a comforting sense of peace, making all worries and sorrows fade away or momentarily hide. As weeks turned into months, harmony pervaded their household, their relationship always maintaining a friendly boundary. However, parting hands became increasingly difficult as they sought to retain the warmth and trust a little longer. The day to sign the documents arrived, and for some reason, Doris felt far more anxious than Sven. They arrived at the meeting a bit early, and they entered the meeting room. Doris was struck by the sight of her former friend Claire, a bright star amidst the serious people dressed officially. Upon seeing her, Claire merely raised her eyebrows in surprise and whispered something to the woman on her right, who Doris suspected to be Sven's ex-wife. The ex-wife looked Doris up and down, grinning, and then whispered something to her neighbour, a burly man with a thick neck and broad shoulders, giving him instructions. The imposing stranger called Doris into the corridor for a conversation. "Doris, as I guess you're assisting Sven, right?" he muttered. Doris could only nod in response as she stared at him, unable to speak. "Excellent. I was right. I see you're going to be a mother soon. I suspect you could use some money?" "A lot of money," he continued, his intense gaze making Doris uncomfortable. "Just imagine, you'll have your own place and a bank account with enough money for 5 years of worry-free living. All you'll have to do is avoid mentioning the contract points marked with a pencil." Doris exhaled deeply, summoning the strength to break free from the unpleasant man's hypnotic gaze. "I'm going to read everything that's printed in it," she declared firmly, before striding resolutely into the office. She was trembling with indignation, and the details of the unpleasant conversation reverberated in her brain. Could she betray the blind man who had given her refuge? Wrestling with her conscience was not for her. Sven, hearing Doris, discreetly took her hand under the table and squeezed it. She responded in kind. The tension subsided, allowing them to focus on the task at hand. For about an hour, Doris read aloud everything written on the sheets in the folder in front of her. Sven listened, nodding occasionally and asking for certain paragraphs to be re-read. There were a few errors in the contract. Hearing the oddly worded phrases, Sven frowned and stood, ready to halt the negotiations. The others quickly scrambled to explain the discrepancies as simple typos. The issues were swiftly addressed, and the deal was sealed. Doris finally let out a sigh of relief, shaking off hours of stress as she leaned back in her chair. Then she felt a sudden, sharp pain. Clutching her stomach, the woman hunched over and groaned. "What's wrong?" Sven asked with concern, placing a comforting hand on her. A wave of warmth and compassion flowed from his palm, easing her pain. "I don't know," Doris replied, sighing with relief. "I'm not due for another 2 weeks. It might be a false alarm." But another wave of pain overtook her, leaving no doubt the contractions had started. Feeling her distress, Sven quickly called for help. "Quickly, call an ambulance. We need to get Doris to a couch." The room sprang into action, and within 15 minutes, Doris was in an ambulance on her way to the maternity ward. Between contractions, she felt a profound absence. It was as if she were floating in space without an anchor. It wasn't until she was in the hospital that she realized what part was missing. The comforting presence of Sven's hand. Waves of intense pain periodically washed over Doris. Everything hurt, including her thoughts. "Congratulations, you have a girl! Look how adorable she is!" The midwife showed the baby to Doris, helping her to take a closer look at her daughter. The baby, with her wrinkled red face and thin limbs, appeared incredibly beautiful to Doris. This was a part of her. This was the little girl she had carried for 9 months, who was so eager to see the world. "Hi," the new mother smiled at her daughter, who waved her tiny hands, trying to adjust to her spacious new world after the comfort of her mother's womb. Doris suddenly felt an unusual warmth and happiness, and her body felt light. But lying on the hospital bed, her euphoria faded, replaced by anxious thoughts about her future. She was no longer alone. The responsibility for her child weighed on her mind. She found herself longing for the home she shared with Sven during their 3 happy months together. But she knew that her time as his temporary assistant was up. And They hadn't agreed on anything more. It would be downright insolent to show up there with a child. What was she to do? A few days later, her doctor said to her during his rounds, "You and the baby are fine. Tomorrow we'll discharge you. Let your relatives come by 10 o'clock. Doris gave a sad smile, thinking, "Yeah, a whole crowd of relatives will arrive tomorrow." The next morning, an elderly nurse peeked into her room. "Doris, your husband is here for you. However, it's a bit early. He's waiting downstairs." Doris was in disbelief. Did Hunter dare to come to the hospital? What could he want from her? After everything she had been through, she didn't want to see or hear from this scoundrel. Living impoverished would be better than living with such a scoundrel. Filled with determination and indignation, Doris jumped to her feet. Now she would tell him everything. Frowning and mentally crafting sharp responses, Doris descended to the first floor. In the lobby, a man sat on a bench holding a large bouquet of flowers, a white bandage covering his eyes. Doris couldn't believe her eyes. Her heart fluttered with joy. "Oh, Sven, it's you! Good morning!" Her voice wavered with excitement. "Hello, Doris." Recognizing her voice, the man stood and presented the flowers. "Congratulations on the birth of your daughter." "Thank you very much." The new mother gratefully accepted the flowers, holding them close to her chest. "Have you chosen a name yet?" Sven asked. "Stephanie," she said affectionately, burying her face in the bouquet and inhaling its sweet scent. "Beautiful name," the man smiled, "and I've come for you." Doris held her breath, afraid to disturb this newfound happiness. Could this kind, strong man truly want to be with her? "I would be happy if you and Stephanie took my last name," Sven said, breaking the silence. Tears welled in Doris's eyes at his tender words, which she hadn't dared to hope for. "But you haven't even seen me, have you?" she whispered, still in disbelief. "I haven't," the man responded, his voice filled with sincerity. "But I feel like I've known you all my life, even before we met. You're my soulmate. I love you." Overwhelmed, Doris threw herself into his arms, crying. "I love you too. You are the best man in the world," she whispered in his ear. They held each other until the nurse interrupted their embrace. "Hey, you two, are you going to take the child or not?" Doris and Sven, laughing, finally broke their tight embrace. They returned home with the baby and soon got married. Sven helped Doris take care of the little girl, and, unusually, she would quickly calm down in his arms. But with time, the man felt his limitations more acutely. "Doris," he said to her one day, "I've decided to have the surgery. I'm willing to risk it to become a fully capable husband and father. The doctors can't guarantee anything, but I want to try." Doris hugged her husband, then carefully removed his bandage and lovingly kissed his face, marred with burn scars. "Just promise me, if it doesn't work out, you won't be upset. I need you just as you are," she whispered, pressing herself against him. On the day of the surgery, Doris was a bundle of nerves. She paced anxiously in the hospital corridor, approaching every passing medic in hopes of hearing some news. Finally, the doctor emerged with a smile and gently patted her shoulder. "The surgery went well. Don't worry, we'll remove the dressing in a week. Until then, he needs to stay here for observation." Relieved, Doris exhaled, though her nerves remained. She longed to sit beside Sven all night, holding his hand, but the doctor disagreed, and Stephanie wouldn't allow it. She'd have to be patient. A week later, Sven was noticeably anxious before the significant event, clenching and unclenching his hands in an attempt to tame his emotions. His fate would soon be decided, and the course of his future life would become clear. The doctor had reassured him, but Sven detected a lack of confidence in his voice. The man held his breath, attuned to the conversation and activities around him. "You can open your eyes, but slowly, please," the doctor stated. Hesitant, fearing disappointment, Sven clenched his fists and slowly opened his trembling eyelids. Bright light burst into his vision, blinding him momentarily. Except for a white spot, he saw nothing. But gradually, the world around him began to take on a hazy form. To his right was a short, bald man in a white coat. To his left was a pretty, blonde-haired young woman carrying a baby. Her face was lit with a radiant smile, and from her lips came the familiar, beloved voice. "How are you, dear?" Blinking to confirm the reality of this miraculous vision, Sven replied, "I never realized how beautiful you are." He reached out and gently took the woman's hand. Doris blushed, her eyesight not yet fully recovered, but the progress was encouraging. The sight did not return completely, but even this result pleased and inspired the man. To punish his ex-wife for her betrayal, Sven took her to court and reclaimed his unlawfully taken property. No lawyer could assist Bree. The truth was on Sven's side. Reinvigorated, Sven returned to work with renewed itch. One day during lunch, Bree appeared at his workplace. She barged into the office and, uninvited, took a seat in the visitor's chair. She crossed her legs seductively and looked at her ex-husband. She exuded elegance and glamour, fresh from the beauty salon, in anticipation of their meeting. "Hi, Sven. I'm so glad you recovered," she declared, and Sven realized that her perfect appearance and captivating voice no longer affected him. "What do you want?" he asked indifferently, observing the antics of the traitor who had left him in his darkest hour. "Why do you speak with me so harsh? I missed you," she replied, brimming with feigned goodwill. "When I was in the hospital, you didn't miss me much. You never even came to visit. Were you too busy with the lawyers?" he retorted sarcastically. Bree was unfazed by his biting remark. It seemed she was prepared for such a cold reception. "I was foolish then, but now I understand that I still love you, just like we were on our honeymoon. Remember how good we were together." Her cynical attempt to evoke the happy times of their past had the opposite effect. Sven simply frowned and shook his head sadly. "You can't step into the same river twice. Too much has happened." Ignoring his words, the ex-wife moved closer. Her barely covered chest threatened to escape the indecently deep cleavage. "I am still the same Bree, the one you loved and passionately kissed on those hot nights," she purred seductively. She attempted to embrace him and kiss him, but Sven firmly pushed her away. "Stop this circus," he said. "I now understand your capabilities. Nothing can change. Everything is lost irrevocably." The young woman was taken aback. She had never faced such rejection, yet hope still lingered in her heart. "Please give me one more chance. I will prove my love to you," she pleaded, gazing earnestly into his eyes. Sven only smirked in response. "Did you ever love me? I don't recall such a thing. True love is different. I only came to understand this recently. I love another woman." Bree's expression quickly shifted, becoming one of contempt as she hissed angrily. "Is it the simpleton with a child from an unknown man, and who's claiming it's yours?" Sven couldn't tolerate this. He stood up decisively and pointed towards the door. "Get out! You have no right to make such a claim. Don't ever come back here." Bree snorted scornfully and slowly left, swaying her hips. However, the stirred hornet's nest was not so easily calmed. "My plan didn't work. He chased me away," Bree complained to Claire, whom she recently befriended. "He says he loves your orphan friend." Claire pondered this. Her desire to spite her ex-friend arose from deep down in her heart. "We need to separate them, and I think I know how," she said, her tone full of implication. A familiar figure appeared on the small screen of the intercom. Doris recoiled from the unpleasant sight. "Hunter, how did you find me? What do you want?" she asked. He smiled kindly, holding a bouquet of fiery red roses. "Let me in, Doris. I need to talk to you. These are for you, your favourite," he said. Doris hesitated. Her husband wasn't home. She decided to step outside and talk there. But as the lock clicked open, Hunter burst into the house, ignoring her protests. He thrust the flowers into Doris's hands and made himself comfortable on the living room sofa. "Is that my daughter?" he exclaimed, noticing the little girl in the playpen. "That's not your daughter," Doris said firmly. "But I've calculated the time and I'm sure that—" Doris clenched her teeth and asked, "What do you want?" Hunter laughed, stood up and tried to hug her. "I realized I can't be without you." Doris pushed him away. He landed on the sofa and laughed. "Why so cold? You used to be different." Suddenly, Sven appeared in the doorway. He glanced at Hunter, the bouquet, picked up Stephanie and went into another room with her. The uninvited guest quickly made his exit. Seemingly, he had accomplished the task set for him by Claire. "What was he doing here?" Doris's husband asked angrily. The tone of the voice was ominous. "Honey, he stormed into the house, shoving me aside. I didn't invite him over or call him," she stammered in her defence, although she wasn't at fault. "How could he not have been invited if he was sitting in our living room?" Sven retorted. His baseless accusation deeply hurt Doris. "Sven, you're shouting at me for no reason. Nothing like that happened." Her voice now filled with indignation. Didn't he trust her at all? Blinded by jealousy, Sven continued to fume. "Perhaps I returned early and interrupted your rendezvous," he sneered. This was the last straw. Doris loved Sven deeply, but if he was going to continue doubting her, what was the point of being together? Without trust, their relationship meant nothing. That evening, they spent the rest of their time in silence, each nursing their hurt feelings. It was the first big disagreement in their married life. The morning didn't elevate their strained relationship. Sven went to work without saying any words and spent the day troubled by these memories of Doris's audacious former suitor, who had acted like he still owned her. Could it be that her feelings lingered, since she hadn't shooed him away? These thoughts filled him with bitterness and unease. Then it hit him. He could check the security camera footage. The man's nervous excitement made it difficult to operate the keyboard initially. What would he discover? Betrayal? After reviewing the footage, he couldn't help but grin with relief. He'd been a fool. How could he doubt his beloved wife? Everything was crystal clear. Now, he needed to enhance their home security to prevent such incidents in the future. However, first and foremost, he had to apologize to Doris. "Oh, Doris, my joy, how I love you!" With this sentiment in his heart, he returned home, picking up a large bouquet of lilies and the finest cake he could find at the bakery. Now he would kneel and beg for forgiveness from his faithful wife. But the house was unusually empty. Pride forced the woman to take the child and leave, no longer feeling welcome. Again, Sven plunged into those feelings when he had languished alone with his depression. Total misery, and he blamed himself for this. Doris's phone was disconnected, and Sven had no idea where to find her. His heart was torn apart. His hasty conclusions and cruel accusations had deeply hurt his wife, forcing her to take the child and leave. He needed to act fast. Sven questioned all the neighbours for information, but to no avail. Doris had no acquaintances in the city to whom she could turn. Sven went to the modelling agency where she used to work, yet they knew nothing. He even visited the orphanage where Doris grew up, but found no clues there either. No one could assist him in his search. Late at night he returned to the empty, lifeless house. Exhausted, he collapsed on the living room sofa, unable to bear the thought of spending the night in their marital bedroom. After a sleepless night of worry, Sven set out at dawn to continue his search. He decided to scour social assistance institutions, hoping to find some trace of his family. One by one, he visited homes for people in difficult life situations, but found no trace of the woman he was looking for. As night approached, there was only one place left to check. With little hope, Sven arrived there, fearing if he didn't find his wife and child. "Yes, there is a woman named Doris here," a shelter worker told him, leading him to the room where she'd been staying since the day before. Doris sat on a narrow bed, gently rocking their daughter Stephanie in her arms and humming softly. All the eloquent apologies Sven had prepared during his search instantly left his mind. He could only fall at her feet and bury his face in her lap. He sat there for a while, not daring to look at his wife. It was only when she gently touched him that he stirred. Doris stroked his head and whispered, "What's wrong, Sven?" He raised a guilty gaze to her and said, "Please forgive me, love. I was a fool. Can we please go home?" Doris gave him an affectionate smile. Of course, she forgave him immediately. True love doesn't hold grudges. A couple of months later, the man arrived at his office in a light-hearted and happy mood, but he was met with an unpleasant surprise. His ex-wife was standing near the security. Sven was wary, expecting some sort of trick from her. However, he noticed that she appeared different. Her shoulders were slumped, and her usually regal posture was gone. Her face was gaunt, and bags under her eyes added years to her appearance. Her dark hair was simply slicked back, and there was something unsettling in her eyes. "Sven, I need to talk to you urgently." Her voice was no longer commanding, but pleading. "Let's go to the office," he responded concisely. Bree obediently took the offered chair and stared blankly in front of her, unsure of where to start. "What's the matter?" Sven asked, growing concerned by her distressed appearance. "A few weeks ago, the doctors gave me a terrible diagnosis. It appears my time is limited." Her voice was hoarse and shaky. With trembling fingers, she took a piece of paper out of her purse and handed it to Sven. He read it and sighed heavily, unsure of what to say. "You were right. God has punished me after all. I don't even have the resources for treatment now." She was silent for a moment before continuing. "I want to ask for your forgiveness, for everything." "If you're talking about the property, I've restored justice and returned what you had stolen," said her ex-husband, who genuinely felt sorry for Bree. Stripped of all pretense and artificiality, she was just an ordinary woman, tormented by illness. "You don't know everything," she said slowly. "In the first year of our marriage, I got pregnant and got rid of it, and then 2 more times. I didn't want children." Sven was silent, stunned by her confession. She had betrayed him from the start. "And I also wanted to separate you from Doris," Bree continued. Her gaze dimmed, and in a quiet, almost whispering voice, she added, "And I was the one who arranged that explosion. I wanted to be a widow. I wanted to take over everything as soon as possible. I now realize that I committed a sin, but at that time, my desire for power completely consumed me, as if a demon had taken over. Please forgive me if you can." The end of Bree's confession left the man speechless, grappling with the information. She watched him guiltily, awaiting his verdict. Finally, Sven managed to say, "I'll give you the money for treatment as much as you need, but I might never forgive you. You're a terrible person, a monster in human form." While this was happening, Stephanie slept peacefully, smacking her tiny lips in her sleep. Doris watched her with admiration. The baby was growing so quickly, developing new skills, not just day by day, but hour by hour. Doris wanted to take in and remember every first. Her first word, her first tooth, her first wobbly step. Sighing, the woman left the room and went into the living room. She turned on the TV quietly and picked up her unfinished knitting, a small pink cap for Stephanie. Sven came over and sat on the sofa, hugging his wife. "Are you watching those fairy tales again?" he asked, teasing her. Doris smiled warmly. "Yes, I've loved fiction since I was a child. And isn't our life like a fairy tale? I'm fortunate enough to meet you." Saying this, the woman tenderly kissed her Prince Charming. Outside, the rain fell softly, lulling the loving couple gathered around the family hearth. They were certain, now more than ever, that after the storm, the sun would surely return, warming them with its rays.
Hola, suscríbete a Historias Vitales para no perderte nuevas historias. Mi esposa había estado trabajando en su proyecto especial durante 4 meses ahora. No era su proyecto personal, pero ella era la persona principal y responsable de su éxito. El proyecto estaba diseñado para salvar a su empresa, Bixler Enterprises. Los últimos 4 meses habían sido difíciles porque se vio obligada a trabajar duro. Era importante tanto para ella como para la empresa. Había una buena posibilidad de que Bixler Enterprises quebrara si el proyecto no se completaba. Sara tenía una licenciatura de Albrecht y un MBA de Wharton. Era la más inteligente de la familia. Yo empecé a trabajar como mecánico de autos justo después de la secundaria y después de 21 años seguía siendo mecánico de autos. No me importaba porque me gustaba el trabajo y pagaba bien. Era suficiente para pagar la universidad de Sara y criar a 2 hijos. No vivíamos lujosamente, pero estábamos bien. Los niños ya se habían mudado, y las cosas iban bastante bien con nuestros ingresos. Sara quedó embarazada 3 meses después de casarnos a la edad de 18 años. Durante los primeros años de nuestro matrimonio, vivimos con mis padres. Ellos tenían una gran casa vacía ya que 4 de mis hermanos se habían mudado. Eso significaba que teníamos una niñera mientras Sara completaba sus primeros años de universidad. Debido a 2 embarazos, la carrera de 4 años le llevó 6 años completarla. Fue difícil, pero lo logró. Siempre tuve trabajo y nunca me faltó trabajo extra si lo necesitaba. Después de que Sara se graduó de Wharton, alquilamos nuestro propio lugar. Tuvo ofertas de trabajo de varias empresas grandes, pero todas requerían que nos mudáramos. A mí no me importaba, pero Sara quería quedarse cerca de casa. Por eso decidió trabajar en Bixler Enterprises. Pagaba bien, pero lo más importante, le daba responsabilidad y la oportunidad de avanzar. Sara era una empleada trabajadora y dedicada. La presentación es el jueves en el Hotel Thyssen en Filadelfia. Tomé unos días libres en el trabajo para ayudarla según fuera necesario. Al final, todo lo que logré fue hacerle algo de comer cuando llegaba a casa. No sabía nada sobre su trabajo, ni tampoco quería saber. Los negocios corporativos de alto nivel me aburrían. Empresarios de Europa, Asia y América del Sur venían aquí, la empresa pagaba sus boletos de avión y proporcionaba habitaciones en el Hotel Thyssen mientras estaban aquí. Era caro como el infierno, y por algunas cosas que Sara había dicho, la empresa estaba sobreestimando sus finanzas. Su presentación era importante para ella, para la empresa y para más de 200 empleados. Hasta el martes por la noche, todo iba bien. Sara llegó a casa con un traje nuevo, un traje gris con una blusa blanca. Desplegó todo lo que necesitaba en la cama de la habitación de invitados. Cuando se trataba de la limpieza de la casa, ella era normal, pero cuando se trataba del trabajo, era meticulosa. No entendía por qué necesitaba sacar su ropa interior de lujo, pero no dije nada. Además de su traje para la presentación, tenía varios vestidos de cóctel lindos para eventos sociales antes y después del evento. Siempre había evitado tales eventos, pero me sentía obligado a ir con ella si ella quería que lo hiciera. Me agradeció la oferta, pero dijo que no era necesario. Todos los materiales y equipos que necesitaba estaban guardados ordenadamente en el maletero de su Volvo. Antes de salir del trabajo, ella misma conducía el coche para asegurarse de que todo estuviera en perfectas condiciones. Tenía todo el día miércoles para prepararse y toda la noche del miércoles para socializar con sus invitados. Sara era tan buena en lo que hacía que sentía que habría sido mejor si simplemente me hubiera mantenido alejado de ella. Finalmente, había terminado. Lo había revisado y vuelto a revisar todo. Todo lo que necesitaba ahora era una ducha caliente y una buena noche de sueño. Supongo que mi error fue que empecé a revisar sus cosas después de que Sara comenzara a ducharse. Pensé que estaba ayudando, pero resultó ser lo contrario. Estaba moviendo cosas en la cama cuando un pequeño sobre blanco cayó del bolsillo lateral de su bolso de maquillaje. Una carta de una farmacia, pero no del tipo que solemos usar. Dentro había 10 pastillas. No tenía idea de qué era, Pren, y las instrucciones eran confusas. Si es necesario, tomar una pastilla y luego una segunda pastilla 12 horas después. Pensé que podría ser algo que ella había conseguido para la ansiedad o los nervios, pero las instrucciones no tenían sentido. La receta estaba escrita a su nombre el lunes. Volví a poner el sobre en su lugar mientras ella terminaba de ducharse. Decidí que quería saber más sobre Pren antes de contarle sobre ello. Por supuesto, si lo mencionaba, significaría que estaba revisando sus cosas. Odio los dilemas. Mientras Sara se preparaba para dormir, fui a nuestro ordenador doméstico y busqué. 10 minutos después, me uní a mi esposa bajo las sábanas. Pasé toda la noche despierto, preguntándome por qué mi esposa había recogido una receta para la píldora del día después, especialmente después de que me hicieran una vasectomía hace 10 años. A la mañana siguiente, me levanté temprano, pero no estaba descansado. Di un largo paseo, esperando que despejara mi mente. Me dirigí hacia casa con reticencia, temiendo lo que podría hacer o decir cuando llegara allí. Mi hijo Joe se unió a la Marina después de la escuela secundaria y estaba en su primer año en San Diego. Nuestra hija Gloria se casó con su amor de la infancia el año pasado y acababa de mudarse a Dallas. Eso dejaba solo a Sara y a mí. Echaba de menos a los niños, pero esperaba envejecer con mi esposa. Ella era la única mujer que me había interesado, y ahora todo estaba. Si Sara estaba teniendo una aventura, lo ocultaba bien. Por supuesto, nunca la vigilé. Nunca miré sus correos electrónicos o llamadas telefónicas. No tenía razones para hacerlo. No tenía forma de saber qué estaba haciendo en el trabajo o después del trabajo. Confiaba en ella completamente. Ion, ¿dónde demonios has estado? ¿Quieres huevos o algo? No, solo café. No me sentía con muchas ganas de hablar. ¿Qué pasa, cariño? Solo son 3 días. Puedes venir si quieres, pero te aburrirás como una ostra. No, realmente no quiero ir, pero odio dejarte sola. Me preocupo cuando no estás aquí. Es muy dulce, querido, pero estará bien. No voy a salir del hotel en todo este tiempo. Pasaré la mayor parte del día asegurándome de que la sala de conferencias esté lista, y esta noche tendré una agradable charla con nuestros posibles clientes. Mañana, probablemente ni siquiera tendré la oportunidad de ir al baño. Llegaré a casa lo más temprano posible el viernes. Te prometo un gran fin de semana si sabes a lo que me refiero. Todo eso suena bien, pero no puedes culparme por preocuparme. Soy un mecánico de autos, y tengo una esposa hermosa y exitosa. A veces tengo la sensación de que estás menos interesada en mejorar nuestra situación familiar que en avanzar en tu carrera. Detente, maldita sea, Ion. Siempre he respetado lo que haces para ganarte la vida y nunca he insinuado lo contrario. Criaste a 2 grandes niños y me pusiste a través de la universidad. Eres un gran esposo, un gran padre y un buen proveedor, y nunca olvides eso. Terminé mi café mientras ella recogía la mesa. ¿Quieres que te llame? No, no es una buena idea. Tendré el móvil apagado, y voy a apagar el teléfono de la habitación por la noche para poder dormir. Te llamaré siempre que pueda. La ayudé a cargar el coche, era tan meticulosa con eso como con todo lo demás. Trabajando, le llevaría 3 horas llegar al Hotel Thyssen. Me quedé en el porche y la vi marcharse. No me molesté en preguntarle por las pastillas. Pasé el resto de la mañana en el porche. No recuerdo haberme preocupado tanto como ahora. Me sentía pequeño e insignificante. Me sentía fuera de mi liga. Era un tipo de pueblo con un trabajo mediocre y una esposa exitosa. Era una combinación equivocada. Debería haberlo notado antes. Me sentía estúpido. El mejor traje que tenía era una chaqueta azul y un par de pantalones. Al menos tenía algunas corbatas, aunque tenían 10 años de antigüedad. Acababa de terminar de vestirme cuando sonó el teléfono fijo. Oye, cariño, solo quería avisarte de que llegué bien. ¿Tuviste un buen viaje? Supongo que el tráfico no estaba demasiado denso. Estuvo bien. Te llamaré esta noche. Ahora tengo que irme. Estoy en la habitación 714, Sara. Puedo estar en casa de mis padres o en la de mis hermanos esta noche si quieres llamarme a mi móvil. De acuerdo. Suena el teléfono móvil. Te quiero, tengo que irme. Me tomé mi tiempo para llegar a Filadelfia. No fui directo al Thyssen, primero me detuve y compré un filete con queso. Prometí hacer una larga noche. No estaba seguro de qué iba a hacer. Estacioné en el garaje del hotel y simplemente esperé. Tarde o temprano, tenía que entrar en el hotel. Simplemente no podía decidir cuándo hacerlo. El sonido de mi teléfono celular me ayudó a tomar mi decisión. Ion, solo quería avisarte de que todo se ha arreglado. Ahora voy a bajar para encontrarme con algunas personas y cenar. No olvidaste nada, ¿verdad? No, todo está bien. Tengo todo en mi habitación para mañana. ¿Necesitas algo? No, Ion, relájate. Voy a apagar mi teléfono. Te llamaré mañana por la mañana. ¿De acuerdo? Ríe, diviértete. No es divertido, Ion, es trabajo. No parecía estar demasiado fuera de lugar. El vestíbulo, el restaurante y las salas de conferencias estaban llenos de gente, así que pude pasar desapercibido. Había un folleto pequeño y bonito que mostraba el diseño de todas las habitaciones del hotel. Me paseé por las diferentes habitaciones y me detuve en las paredes, mirando alrededor entre la multitud. No tenía ni idea de qué haría si Sara me veía. Lo averiguaría si y cuando eso sucediera. Encontré un tablero de eventos que enumeraba todas las habitaciones que estaban siendo utilizadas por los diversos grupos. Bixler Enterprises no tenía habitaciones disponibles para el miércoles por la noche. Esto me pareció interesante. Sara había dicho que no iba a salir del hotel, pero ahora no estaba tan seguro de eso. Había 3 comedores, familiar, informal y de alta cocina. A Sara no le gustaba mucho cenar con niños, así que fui primero al comedor informal. Solo me llevó 5 minutos asegurarme de que no estaba allí. Tuve mejor suerte en el salón gourmet, era una acogedora mesita encajada en la esquina, el tipo de mesa que la gente reserva para tener un encuentro privado. Sara llevaba un vestido de cóctel negro con un escote pronunciado y perlas, se veía elegante y su acompañante parecía apreciarlo. Conocía a algunas personas con las que trabajaba Sara, y él no era una de ellas. Me resultaba familiar, pero no había forma de que pudiera recordarlo. Había muchas sillas libres, así que no tuve problemas para cruzar la sala. Había velas y pequeños candelabros de cristal en las mesas. Apagué la mía y le dije al camarero que me molestaba por el glaucoma. Pedí el plato de pollo de siempre y me acomodé. El camarero me sirvió el café por tercera vez. Disculpe, el tipo en la mesa de enfrente me parece muy familiar. ¿Sabes quién es? Sí, ese es Malcolm Eugene Foote. Es miembro del Consejo Municipal, se espera que se postule para el Congreso en los próximos años. ¿Es esa su esposa con él? Es muy bonita. No, esta es la primera vez que la veo. Siempre usa esa mesa para señoras especiales, si me entiende. Simplemente le sonreí y pedí la cuenta. Nunca había visto a Sara tan sensual con un hombre antes. Parecía captar cada palabra que decía, como si fuera Dios o algo así. No estaban haciendo nada inapropiado, pero tampoco era platónico ni profesional. Cuando me fui, estaban terminando su segunda botella de vino. Ahora entendía por qué se había llevado su lencería elegante. Me acomodé en una esquina del vestíbulo para que no me vieran. 10 minutos después, salieron del restaurante. Ella le tomaba la mano mientras caminaban por el vestíbulo hacia el ascensor. Observé cuidadosamente los indicadores de piso. Que el ascensor se detuviera en el tercer piso era una buena señal, significaba que no lo había llevado a su habitación. Era una mala señal cuando el ascensor no llegaba al séptimo piso, significaba que ella fue a su habitación. Por si acaso me equivocaba en algo, me senté en el vestíbulo y observé el ascensor durante 1 hora. La gente entraba y salía, pero Sara no estaba entre ellos. Saqué mi maleta vacía del coche y me dirigí al mostrador de recepción. Aunque podía demostrar que era su esposo, me costó trabajo conseguir una tarjeta llave. Se dieron después de llamar a la habitación, pero nadie respondió. Finalmente, estaba en camino a la habitación 714 con la tarjeta llave. Ni siquiera encendí las luces al principio, simplemente me senté en la oscuridad de la habitación durante más de 1 hora. No fue difícil asegurarme de que no regresara a la habitación. Primero, empacé todas sus ropas y pertenencias personales. No dejé nada atrás. Revisé el paquete de Preven, todavía quedaban 10 pastillas en el tocador. De manera muy ordenada, estaban todos los artículos que necesitaría para su presentación al día siguiente. Comencé a llenar la maleta. Había 24 carpetas promocionales especialmente encuadernadas y otras 20 carpetas regulares, todas ellas fueron a la maleta. Un proyector digital fue lo siguiente, seguido de una computadora portátil. Tomé su bolso y su celular, que había dejado en la habitación. Todo lo que tenía consigo era un bolso de mano y probablemente un tubo de lápiz labial. Di una vuelta por la habitación tan cuidadosamente como lo hizo ella para asegurarme de no perder nada. Una vez satisfecho, dejé las llaves del coche y mi anillo de bodas en el tocador. Aparte de esos 2 objetos, la habitación estaba completamente vacía. El ascensor se dirigió directamente al estacionamiento, no tuve problemas para llevar 2 maletas, y 20 minutos después, estaba en la autopista rumbo al norte. Pasaban las 3 de la madrugada, no tenía idea de que había pasado tanto tiempo. 1 hora o 2 después, sonó mi teléfono celular, la identificación de llamadas mostraba el número del Listen. ¿Ion? Sí, ¿dónde estás? Estaré en casa pronto. Eso fue todo lo que dije. Hubo silencio en el otro extremo de la línea. Los vendedores tienen un viejo dicho, el primero que habla pierde. Pareció una eternidad antes de que ella hablara. Ion, lo siento. No preguntó nada y simplemente colgó. Apagué mi teléfono, era obvio que había regresado a su habitación. Más tarde ese día, tenía que dar una presentación que salvaría a su empresa y le daría un ascenso. Metí las maletas en el desván del garaje. Sara nunca iba allí y nunca pensó en buscar algo allí. Por supuesto, en este punto, estoy bastante seguro de que no importaba. Primero, recogí todas mis ropas y pertenencias personales. La mayoría de los hombres tienen sus propias herramientas, generalmente es un requisito para el trabajo. Pasé por la tienda, cargué las mías en el Subaru y recogí mi último cheque de pago. Para entonces, los bancos ya estaban abiertos, no tuve que hacer ninguna manipulación financiera complicada. Simplemente retiré todo el dinero de mis cuentas. Almorcé en Hagerstown, Maryland. Tenía suficiente dinero para vivir durante unos años, pero sabía que estaría buscando trabajo muy pronto. Sara y yo éramos parecidos en eso de que a ambos nos encantaba trabajar. La voy a extrañar. Pasé un par de horas en las cuevas del Uray y alquilé una habitación cerca de Whitewell. No tenía idea de qué iba a hacer. Era sábado, y me encontré sentado en el acuario de Chattanooga, observando la naturaleza que nunca había visto antes. Pasé unas horas simplemente relajándome y decidí que era un buen lugar para estar. Compré un pase anual para el acuario y, para la hora de la cena, tenía un lugar donde quedarme. Era un remolque móvil en el parque, pero estaba amueblado y era económico. No necesitaba mucho. La primera cosa que haría el lunes por la mañana sería conseguir un trabajo. Un buen hombre de mantenimiento siempre puede conseguir un trabajo, especialmente si está dispuesto a trabajar duro. Podría permanecer discreto hasta que fuera el momento de renovar mi licencia de conducir o las etiquetas del coche, me preocuparé por eso cuando llegue el momento. El domingo por la tarde, llamé a Gloria. Me sentí obligado a informarle sobre lo que estaba sucediendo, pero Sara ya se lo había contado. Fue bastante franca con Gloria sobre lo que había pasado, dijo que había engañado, que la sorprendí, que me fui y que ella perdió su trabajo. Me sentí mal porque ella perdió su trabajo, pero ese era el precio que tenía que pagar. Le pedí a Gloria que le dijera a Josh lo que estaba sucediendo la próxima vez que hablara con él. También le dije que la llamaría aproximadamente una vez al mes para verificar cómo iban las cosas. No le dije dónde estaba. Para el mediodía del día siguiente, tenía un trabajo. En realidad, estaba a poca distancia del parque de remolques, con el Waffle House a mitad de camino. ¿Qué más podría querer un hombre? No sé cómo manejaron el papeleo, pero me estaban pagando $20 por hora sin hacer preguntas. Estaba feliz, y ellos también. Ni siquiera tendría que tocar el dinero que traje conmigo. Unos 2 meses después, Gloria me informó que Sara se había mudado de la casa y estaba viviendo con sus padres. Gloria no sabía nada más, pero estaba feliz de que estuviera estable y le estuviera yendo bien. Josh me llamó desde San Diego solo para informarme que iba a hacer un crucero. Era técnico en aviónica en un portaaviones, intentó explicar qué hacía exactamente, pero estaba más allá de mi comprensión. Nunca supe mucho sobre cosas técnicas. Ambos tuvieron cuidado de no decir nada malo sobre su madre, aprecié eso. Después de eso, todo siguió como siempre. Comencé a hablar con Gloria al menos semanalmente, Josh y yo comenzamos a enviar correos electrónicos regularmente. Gloria hablaba regularmente con Sara, pero decía muy poco sobre lo que estaba haciendo o dónde estaba. Nunca presenté la solicitud de divorcio, y parece que Sara tampoco lo hizo. Tengo una licencia de conducir de Tennessee y las etiquetas en el Subaru. Comencé a frecuentar un bar local un par de veces al mes y tuve encuentros casuales, 2 mujeres se alternaban como mis compañeras nocturnas regulares. No buscaban compromisos, y yo tampoco, parecía funcionar bien para todos nosotros. La vida era buena. Eso fue hace mucho tiempo, y gradualmente olvidé a Sara. Con el tiempo, el Subaru comenzó a darme problemas, había olvidado cuánto tiempo había pasado. Tenía más de 200,000 millas. Estaba reflexionando sobre esto con una jarra de cerveza un día cuando me di cuenta de que habían pasado casi 5 años desde que me fui de casa. Mantuve un contacto cercano con ambos hijos, Gloria ya tenía 2 hijos propios en este momento y quería que los visitara. Josh casi se casó con una mujer tailandesa, pero en el último momento, se negó. Por lo general, trabajaba 6 días a la semana y usaba el domingo para recuperarme del sábado por la noche, no había ninguna buena razón para que alguien llamara a la puerta de mi remolque a las 6 de la mañana de un viernes. Su grosería fue recompensada por un hombre medio desnudo abriendo la puerta, los calzoncillos del día son repugnantes, y la dama en la puerta, juzgando por la expresión en su rostro, estuvo de acuerdo conmigo. Ella apartó la mirada, pero su compañero no parecía impresionado. Norm habría usado pantalones, pero en un momento como este, los invitados me molestaron. Estamos buscando a John Terrell. No los conozco. Me llamo David Simmons, y esta es mi esposa Mara. Tenemos un problema y esperamos que nos puedas ayudar. Lo siento mucho, no trabajo a altas horas de la noche. Si necesitan algo relacionado con su auto, tendrán que ir a la tienda. Esto provocó varias miradas en blanco y finalmente una respuesta. No tiene nada que ver con tu trabajo, es más un problema personal. ¿Podemos entrar? El interior del remolque lucía desordenado, rara vez tenía invitados, así que rara vez lo limpiaba. Incluso mis novias insistían en que fuéramos a su lugar. Hagan como en su casa, déjenme ponerme los pantalones enseguida. Al entrar en el dormitorio, dejé la puerta abierta solo para mostrarles lo hospitalario que soy. También me puse una camisa. ¿Les gustaría tomar café? Solo tomará unos 10 minutos. Aparté algunas cosas del sofá para que pudieran sentarse, no hubo respuesta a la pregunta del café. Tenemos una hija adoptiva de 4 años y otra de 2 que necesita un trasplante de médula ósea, y esperamos que nos puedas ayudar. Estamos dispuestos a pagarte si es necesario. ¿Con mi médula ósea? No, queremos usarla y estamos dispuestos a compensarte por cualquier inconveniente. Creo que quieren comprarla. Estaba actuando como un listillo, y de repente me di cuenta de ello. Estas personas eran serias, tenían un problema real y estaban buscando ayuda. Lo siento mucho, no quise interrumpir. Por favor, continúen. Nuestra mejor oportunidad de encontrar un donante es un familiar cercano. Eres nuestra mejor esperanza. Mira esto. No quiero ser un grosero, pero creo que se equivocaron de persona. ¿Cuándo nació su hija? Cumplirá 5 años en julio. Marche Simmons habló por primera vez, y sonó sincera. Odio ser el portador de malas noticias, pero me hice una vasectomía hace 15 años. No hay forma de que pueda ser su padre. ¿Por qué tu nombre estaba en el certificado de nacimiento? No puedo responder eso, tal vez deberían preguntarle a su madre. Esa afirmación fue recibida con silencio. Sentí pena por estas personas, pero no sabía cómo ayudarles. ¿Cuál es el nombre de la madre? Sarah Lise Terrell. No encontraba las palabras. Tal vez no debería haber tomado esas malditas pastillas de ella, por supuesto, entonces esas personas no tendrían una hija en absoluto. Todo lo que pensaba que había superado el dolor, y aquí está de nuevo, viejos recuerdos de mi esposa teniendo relaciones sexuales con ese maldito político de Filadelfia. Estaba empezando a olvidarlo todo, y ahora estaba de vuelta. Maldita sea. Ahora entiendo y pido disculpas por mi grosería e insensibilidad. Haré todo lo que esté en mi poder para ayudarles. En primer lugar, porque no puede Sara hacerse un trasplante de médula ósea. Médicamente, no puede. ¿Por qué no? Es madre, tiene que ser una donante adecuada. Ella es una donante adecuada, pero está demasiado enferma. Los médicos se negaron siquiera a considerar utilizarla. ¿Enferma de qué? Está muriendo de insuficiencia hepática. Le quedan menos de 6 meses de vida. Esto no tiene sentido. Siempre ha estado perfectamente sana. Además, no creo que un hígado enfermo le impida donar médula ósea. El hospital no aceptará su firma en el formulario de consentimiento. ¿Estás diciendo que hay algo mal en su cabeza? Ambos me miraron en silencio, sabían la respuesta, pero no querían decirlo. En ese momento, no quería que se sintieran aún más incómodos. Hace 10 minutos, no me importaban, pero ahora sentía que tenía que protegerlos y ayudarlos. ¿Cómo sucedió esto? ¿Podría alguno de mis hijos ayudar? Quizás, pero pensamos que eras nuestra mejor esperanza. ¿Por qué no van tras su padre, su verdadero padre? Pensamos que eras tú. No tenemos ni idea de quién más podría ser. Sara no nos dijo nada sobre otro posible padre. De hecho, ella no estaba en condiciones de explicar nada, agregó Mara. Obtuvimos la mayoría de nuestra información de la agencia de adopción. Tuve que preparar café y hacer pis, permítanme un momento. Dejé a mis invitados sentados mientras preparaba el café. Solo tomó unos minutos. Mientras se preparaba, fui al baño, algo que necesitaba hacer urgentemente. Traté de ser discreto, ya había avergonzado lo suficiente a Mara. ¿Dónde viven? En Westchester, Pensilvania. Les haré una oferta. Si les digo quién es el verdadero padre de su hija, deben prometerme que lo perseguirán sin descanso hasta obtener lo que desean. ¿De qué estás hablando? El padre de su hija es un político prominente en Pensilvania. Por supuesto, negará todo y probablemente les proporcionará documentos legales para detener sus esfuerzos. Si acuerdan presionar lo suficiente para que él admita que la niña es suya, podrán avergonzarlo y obligarlo a hacerse un trasplante de médula ósea. Eso es lo que quieren, ¿verdad? Sí, claro, pero ¿cómo hacemos eso? No lo sé. Soy mecánico. Trabajo con metal para ganarme la vida. Creo que la mejor manera sería utilizar la televisión, la radio y los periódicos. Los políticos harán cualquier cosa para evitar una mala publicidad. ¿Tienen amigos que puedan ayudar? Bueno, ahora ambos estaban sonriendo. Debo haber dicho algo que les dio esperanza. Creo que podemos hacer esto. ¿Quién demonios es él? Malcolm Eugene Foote. Se postula para el Senado de los Estados Unidos. Apuesto a que hará cualquier cosa para evitar una mala publicidad. El café estaba listo, pero David y Marchen no podían esperar para llegar a casa. Antes de irse, les dije cómo ponerse en contacto con Gloria y Joss en caso de que los necesitaran. Estaba seguro de que ayudarían. También les pedí que me dijeran dónde estaba Sarah. Probablemente estaría en Pensacola antes de que ellos regresaran a Westchester. Me corté el pelo y compré una camisa nueva. Sarah era una tramposa que arruinó mi vida, pero aún así quería lucir bien cuando la viera. Era otro remolque, pero esta vez era un bonito doble nuevo. Allí estaba su Volvo con una llanta desinflada y un parabrisas roto. La mujer que abrió la puerta no era Sarah. Parecía que la habían empapado fuerte y la habían dejado empapada. Tenía al menos 45, tal vez 50, y debió haber tenido una vida difícil. La falta de maquillaje no ayudaba, y simplemente se veía horrible. No tuve la oportunidad de abrir la boca. Caray, si no es John Terrell. Nunca esperé verte aquí. Tuve que usar la vieja línea, me estás poniendo en desventaja. Serry Hart. Pasa, entra. ¿Quieres una cerveza? No, pero gracias. Estoy aquí para ver a Sarah. Serry cruzó la habitación y se detuvo en el buffet del comedor. Aquí está, John. Mírala todo lo que quieras. Su mano señalaba una urna de latón que estaba en el centro del buffet vacío. Supongo que llegué demasiado tarde. No me moví, solo me quedé mirando el contenedor frente a mí. ¿Puedo tomar una cerveza ahora? Sarah se mudó a Pensacola después de dar a su bebé en adopción. Compró el remolque con el dinero que recibió de Bixler Enterprises después de que la despidieron. Tenía una participación en las ganancias, 401k, y vacaciones y días de enfermedad. Eventualmente, consiguió un trabajo en una fábrica local de prendas de vestir donde trabajaba en el departamento de envíos. Allí fue donde conoció a Serry. Serry alquilaba una habitación de Sarah. Cada centavo que Sarah ganaba iba para el alcohol. Empezó con vino y gradualmente pasó a bebidas más fuertes, las más baratas. Eventualmente, perdió su trabajo debido a su alcoholismo y se vio obligada a usar sus ahorros. Nunca salió con nadie ni salió a ningún lado. Serry se quedó con ella, pagó sus servicios públicos y compró alimentos que Sarah no comía. Le llevó más de 3 años quitarse la vida. Increíblemente, ella tenía un testamento y me dejó un doble remolque y un Volvo. Sherry explicó que Sara estaba tan angustiada por lo que había hecho que simplemente se rindió. No intentó evitar el embarazo ni siquiera terminarlo. La adopción se había arreglado meses antes de que naciera el bebé. Nunca volvió a trabajar, excepto en los trabajos clandestinos que hacía mal. Sherry dijo que Sara no parecía tener ambición ni propósito en la vida. Sara hablaba mucho de mí pero tenía miedo de intentar contactarme. Gloria le dio mi número, pero nunca me llamó. Era como si su aventura de una noche la hubiera lastimado más a ella que a mí. Estuve allí durante 2 semanas y luego vendí el remolque de Sherry por $1 y obtuve $3,000 por el Volvo. 2 días después, estaba en Westchester visitando a mis nuevos amigos David y Marche. Malcolm Eugene Foote resistió al principio, pero David y Marche lo presionaron hasta que cedió. Insistió en pruebas de ADN, que demostraron que era el padre. Para salvar la cara, más o menos lo obligaron a someterse a un trasplante de médula ósea, que fue exitoso. La carrera política y la vida familiar de Malcolm no dejaron una impresión favorable. Su caída en las encuestas fue tan rápida que el partido lo reemplazó por otro candidato unos meses antes de las elecciones. Su esposa solicitó el divorcio y fue muy pública al respecto. Sara y yo estamos viajando ahora a Dallas para ver a Gloria y a mis nietos. No sé cuánto tiempo mantendré a Sara conmigo, probablemente hasta que tenga a alguien.